Hey everyone, welcome back to the Hemmings Hot Rod Barbecue Podcast. On this episode, we've got Kevin Wesley of Wesley Motorsports, and we are going to be talking about SEMA builds because SEMA builds are the best, aren't they, Kevin?
Yeah, they're the best. I like just delivering cars. I don't really like building cars for SEMA. I've decided that.
was so for those out there. So Kevin is really reimagining my 69 Daytona. He is the gentleman that is putting the red eye motor in it, the 8-speed, the whole deal, and making it do things that it was never meant to do in 69, which is pretty impressive. Before we get into that, though, we want to talk a little bit about SEMA and some of the vehicles we see there, some of the trends and things like that, and some of the stuff that you see that simply doesn't work, right? So
yeah, there's a lot of stuff there that doesn't work, but it keeps showing up every year.
Yeah, so when we say doesn't work, Kevin brought up a term a little while ago that I had forgotten about called the Bluetooth drive shaft, which is great.
Yeah, which you see on the things out front, which are called bro dozers. That's another SEMA term I learned a few years ago.
Yep. Right. They have you. If you look at it, if anybody's going to SEMA, you got to look closely. You have to look at, how things are held together. Look for little things like wood screws and zip tie and things like that. Look for things like wheel chocks, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of stuff at SEMA that, while visually it might be really cool to look at, from an actual functionality standpoint, right?
Hey, I wouldn't pick on the wood screws too much. We actually found some drywall screws in your car.
Listen, I will go on. I have no doubt you found a lot of different things in my car. So here's the thing, everybody. So I've got my 68 Charger and my 69 Daytona are both under the knife right now. And the gentleman, Sean, who's doing my 68, Kevin's doing the 69, have both called me and been like, are you kidding me with this? And so I've gotten so many of those calls because here's the thing, as everybody out there knows, I'm not a mechanic, right? And so when you're not, you have a lot of hands in these cars over the 50 years that they've been on the road. Some are good hands, some are not good hands. The bad hands put stuff in cars like wood screws and really shitty crimping, solder, and stuff that you're just like, what? How is this even running? Right?
Yeah.
So walk me through some of the funkiest stuff you found on my Daytona when you started pulling it out, when you started pulling it apart.
Well, I think the 53 rag stuffed in the console around the shifter was pretty entertaining when we took the console out. That was pretty funny. The wood screws holding the Daytona rubber trim in on the nose, that was mildly entertaining.
Okay.
Just basic stuff. The one lowering block on the driver's side and no lowering blocks on the passenger side. That was interesting. I don't know, odd stuff like that.
What's crazy is that with a lot of old cars, right, with a lot of classic cars that have been through, a lot of different hands and whatnot, what's crazy is how jacked up they could be and still function on a relatively, still be okay. That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, you're not going to get 100,000 mile warranty from somebody with some of the stuff that's on these cars, but they'll still make it. I mean, look at all the cars that show up at Cars and Coffee. I mean, those things are not exactly the most stellar machines on the planet, but they get somebody from their house to Starbucks or wherever the coffee place is and back home. So okay. I mean, it's right. I mean, it works.
Well, when you build cars, and aside from building the the wide body Daytona that you ran at Pikes, the Vipers, the Challengers, the Trans Am cars that you've done, how does that translate for you? So when you see stuff on cars that you might work on, are you just like, what you get annoyed, or do you just laugh and be like, oh my God, what is your general reaction?
At some point you have to laugh, because you just can't stop it. I mean, as much as in theory people should know better, they just don't. And I mean, there's even stuff that we do on our cars that I'll stop and say, that's not really the way I want to do it, but it's going to work today.
Right.
You don't leave it there forever, but sometimes it just has to get through, and okay, that's fine,
Right.
whatever. But I mean, you want to circle back around to it at some point and fix it.
Right. So that'll bring me back to the 10,000 rags that you found stuffed in the center console. So when Kevin got my car, he started pulling it apart, and there were probably 50 rags stuffed in the center console. Now, the reason for that was we were driving the car from California to Michigan, and we had just replaced the transmission, and God, that tunnel got hot to the point where you couldn't touch it. And the heat that was radiating off it was so unbearable. The only thing that we could think of doing, because we were in the middle of nowhere, was take as many microfibers as we could and stuff it in there as a barrier to quell the heat. Now,
and that was all from just the big block and the headers. I mean, it doesn't seem like it should have gotten that hot.
A lot of things that car used to do, it shouldn't have done, but
Yeah.
it did. And yeah, it did. And it made it bearable. Now, granted, like idiots, we drove the car across the country in the middle of summertime. That wasn't bright, you know, with no air conditioning, or we had air conditioning, but it didn't work, so no air conditioning. And you know, obviously a mail slot for a grill and no ventilation, so overheating was, well, we just overheated the whole way. So yeah, it was interesting. It was definitely interesting, but it's what's cool is watching a build process go on and seeing how stuff is now done correctly. And
well, you really can't do it better than OE.
right.
So, I mean, because that is 100,000 mile durability validation. So, you know, I mean, like on the car now, we're using as many OE hoses as we can. So, I mean, Red Eye Hellcat has this, you know, 10 miles of water plumbing underneath the hood.
Yeah.
And we're using as many OE hoses as we can. I mean, the one thing that I made quite clear when we started on your car, it's like, if I see a worm drive hose clamp, I'm gonna freaking lose it. So you won't see one of those on your car anywhere.
Well, that's a great point. I mean, you know, we've seen it, and anybody who goes to car shows, goes to SEMA shows like that, we'll see a lot of cars are put together with very interesting components. When we decided to do the Daytona, and Kevin said we're going to revamp this thing, the whole goal was to use OEM, as much OEM stuff as we can, because to your point, it's nobody, I don't care who in the aftermarket you are not outspending an OEM for product testing. You're just not, right?
No, right. And we've used, I mean, short of the power steering control or power steering pressure valve and some hoses for the power steering pump, I think everything so far is OE.
Yeah, which and that's the whole part. You know, one of the things about, if you're just building a cars and coffee car or a show car, that's one thing. Use whatever you want, I care less. We drive the cars. Like the Daytona gets driven, and that car will always be driven. And we were texting back and forth today about, you know, Kevin said, oh, we should drive this thing back to LA and from Michigan and do it, which is, yeah, it should be driven.
Right.
The car, in my opinion, if you have a car, it should never be on a truck and trailer unless something dire happens, right? And that's kind of always been my thing, right?
Or it doesn't have a plate because it's a race car.
Right, or if it's a race car. But like I've always said, like, I don't own a truck or a trailer, so if my cars were somewhere, generally they were driven there. And
yeah.
if they weren't driven there and they were there, that means I broke down along the way and they were flatbed, you know. But I think that what people need to understand, especially when you're doing some kind of builds like this, is one, God, there are so many different levels of quote unquote technicians and builders and, you know, just people who claim to know what they're doing out there. And there are so many that are just so bad at what they do, you know?
Yeah. And it is what it is. I mean, there's no barrier to entry really to go to SEMA, right?
No.
So anything and everything can show up. You would think there'd be some control on it, but there's no way to control it. So it is what it is.
Right.
And there's some really good cars that I think don't get as much press as they should. And then there's some cars that just get all the press, and you look at it and they're like, that thing's never going to see the light of day. And there's no way it could make it around a track or this or that or whatever anyway. So,
right.
And I'm like even with your car, I mean, there's already a couple things that, you know, it's not even done yet, and it's already like, I'm going to change that.
Well, how does being a racer, how does that? Do you look at everything that you touch as, well, no, if it's going 180 miles an hour, it better work. Like, do you look at most of the stuff that you put your hands on and say, okay, you know, this has to be up to this standard or this level?
No, I think it's really, it has to be up to some level of OE standard or close to it, and then you don't have to worry about that validation. But it's really not a full-blown race car, so
right,
you know, it doesn't need to go 24 hours,
right,
or something like that. So I mean, there's things in that respect that I would, you know, I would do differently if it was a pure race car. But even then, we race so many, you know, street cars essentially that are stock. You know, the OE stuff works fine there too.
Yeah, well, that's what I think people don't understand. It always amuses me how people will take OE stuff and then mess it up by putting
but yeah, they mess it up by taking the OE stuff off and putting aftermarket stuff on.
Yeah.
Somebody was telling me that one time, that was a big thing, I guess, with like Corvette upper control arms or something. Everybody'd be like, oh, you need these aftermarket upper controls. It's like, you know how much General Motors spent on that beautiful aluminum upper control arm on your Corvette that you just chucked in the dumpster? I mean, it's like, come on.
Yeah. Just because somebody named Frank with a shop said he could re-engineer it better than $1 billion General Motors Corporation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there are some things that I'm learning on your car that I really, I don't know if I've avoided over the years. Like today, I had the pleasure of rebuilding your steering pot coupler, which was super exciting. That was one thing that I hadn't done before. I don't know how I've avoided it. I think I've avoided it because I just buy new steering columns. But I think that's next on your list one of these days too, because we worked on that column as much as I cared to work on your column.
Well, my favorite, and one of the things about, you know, working with Kevin is just every now and then you'll get a photo, and one of them was of the steering column. It said, your steering column was fucked up, we fixed it. And it was just a photo of the column sitting on the workbench, and there wasn't an explanation of what was wrong. It was just, it was fucked up, we fixed it, done.
Yeah, I think pretty much everything was wrong with it, but
yeah. Well, and that's the crazy part, man, right? As much stuff was wrong with that car, it still got me like, I don't know how many racetracks and drag strips and miles.
Yeah.
That's the crazy part.
But then there's stuff on that steering column. It's like, I don't even want to touch like that cruise control stock and all the cruise control stuff that's buried in there it's like, you know, that stuff that's like, I think is cool.
Yeah.
And one of these days your car will have cruise again, even though it's going to have a red eye and it's going to run on that stock because I've been figuring it out. But for SEMA, it won't be done. So whatever. But it's like, I don't want to break that cruise control stock, tearing that thing apart. So it's like, what can we do? Because some of that stuff is pretty fragile. I mean, it's, you know, 50 some years old.
Totally. Well, you know, it's really interesting because I think there's, like, Kevin shot me a picture today and I looked at, and there was a brake booster in there, and I was like, that's a Hemi brake booster, right?
Yep, absolutely.
You know, I think we're going to get so many questions from the Mopar guys, like the diehard old school guys. They're going to be like, holy shit, he's got a red eye, but then there's a Hemi brake booster in there, and that works, right?
Well, I mean, there's a regular brake booster on the production red eye, so I mean, there's nothing special there. I mean, it pulls vacuum. Is there, you know, a check valve in there, and is there something that controls it? Of course there is. I mean, there's a couple little bits that will be in yours. And then yours will end up with an OE vacuum pump to help just in case. But you know, I don't want to say it's not brain surgery. I mean, this stuff works. So,
but I think so many people out there are pre-programmed to think that OE stuff is just not quality stuff.
You know, but it's funny because that brake booster, so that's an aftermarket, you know, that's a replacement brake booster, right? It looks the part, and then you go to work on it and you're like, this isn't any SAE thread on these master cylinder studs. And it's like, all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's metric. Oh, I guess this is made in China.
Right. Well, and that's another part about when you get parts, and I don't know how many parts that I've gone and put in my, my dailies and stuff like that. And when I say my dailies are 20 years old, right? So I can actually still pretty much work on them myself without sending them to the junkyard. So many of the parts that I've gotten for those idle air control valves, window regulators, things like that are made in China are just straight garbage. And the parts don't work when you get them and they're new.
No.
They're straight junk, And the crazy part is when you you put it in, you expect it to work, it doesn't work. So you think you fixed the problem, which leads you to go, okay, well, it mustn't be what I thought it was, right? And then you go back and you troubleshoot and you go, you go through everything, and then you go, no, it's got to be this. And so then you bring the part back to the auto parts store and you go, I don't think this is working. And they look at it, they go, yeah, it's probably a piece of garbage that's made in China. And you're like, really? And like they take it back, but there's no accounting for your 3 or 4 or 5 hours that you spent trying to re-diagnose the problem, right?
Yeah. Well, and there's some parts on your car that, I guess, let's just say you're lucky that I have quite the stash of stuff.
Oh, dude.
Because I actually went down to one of my other cars and had to pull some parts off the front suspension because, we were talking about how the wheels didn't fit on the front. Well, it's because they really aren't 5 by 4.5. They're like 5 by 4.509 or something.
Right.
And they just don't effing fit. And I went down and got another set of the exact same hubs and they dropped right in.
Yeah. See, that's the other part, right? When people build stuff, you have to really know who's going to be touching your car, right? Yeah. Because there are like you and Sean, who's doing my 68. It's so amazing when like I'll talk to you or I'll talk to him and be like, well, this obviously doesn't work, but I happen to have 8 or 10 of these because I've been doing this for so long, right?
Right.
And people have these stashes, but these stashes are gold. They're gold. Like, perfect example. Kevin was like, hey, do you have switches for your dash? Because originally what we did was we took the OEM dash out of the Daytona. And since we're converting the dash to Dakota digital gauges, right? We sent the original one, I threw it in my Charger because my Charger had crappy autometer gauges. Not crappy gauges, just autometer gauges. All the switches went with it. So it was like, well, shit, we gotta get things. And by the way, did they show up yet?
Yeah, they did. They already got put in today. So.
Perfect. But doing that, finding somebody that has like 50-year-old OEM switches that work, that only happens when you've been doing this for a minute.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the other part is finding that individual or those individuals that are in that kind of network that you have that say, oh yeah, I have this and blah, blah, blah. Like the cruise control stock in the Daytona, right? I had no idea how rare a piece that was. But apparently it's like one of the most unobtainium bits that Chrysler made. And I've had like diehard Mopar guys be like, you know what that switch is worth? And I'm like, no, it's just cruise control. And I didn't know. Apparently
it's the whole assembly is unobtainium.
Yeah.
I mean, remember we left the bracket on the fender well because it's like, I'm not taking that off because we're going to put cruise on it someday, but it's like that's the unobtainium bracket that doesn't exist.
Right. But see, that comes from being a Mopar guy.
Yeah.
That comes from going, listen, I know how rare there's no way I'm taking that off because it's too cool of a piece. Right.
Yeah. And I have one of my buddies collects, for some reason he collects all of that cruise stuff and he ends up putting it on his cars. So as soon as we were pulling it off, he's like, what's Mike going to do with all that cruise stuff? I'm like, get the fuck away from it. It's like, you're not touching it.
Well, it's so, but I mean, that's the difference though. Like when we were doing the 68, I years ago, I think I told you, I bought a rear defrost system at a swap meet. It's a factory rear defrost system for a Charger, right? And
with that weird blower motor and
with
stuff.
the blower motor in the back, whatever, but it's super rare. And like, I don't know, like 22 or 18 Chargers in 68 were made with this thing. And there's a special button on the dash and all this other stuff. My car now has that only because I was like, yeah, rear defrost would be cool to have one day. And so you buy it never knowing you're going to use it. But I'm waiting for the amount of real, like the diehard Mopar guys that goes, is that real? in the vent. Your rear vent is at the rear window and stuff like that. But it's those cool little pieces that if you've been doing this hobby for a while that you see, and it's cool.
But your Daytona has that switch, but I don't recall seeing any bits in the trunk.
There are no bits in the trunk.
So we'll have to actually, I was looking at that because they were messing with the dash today, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's rare. I'm thinking there's no stuff in the trunk. It'd be cool just to hook it up to a regular rear defrost system.
Mm-hmm.
So, BMW makes one that's like peel and stick. We used to run it on the front windshield of race cars. Yeah. So you just basically, it just peels and you stick it on the glass and then you plug it in and it's electric rear defrost.
See that, and that's something like on that car would totally be beneficial. And again,
Absolutely.
If you don't drive your cars, if you're just a car and coffee person and you go, it doesn't matter. Who cares? But
Right.
like this car gets driven in the rain. This car just gets driven like a normal car. And I remember driving it back from LA and I got caught in a rainstorm and I probably pulled into one of the gas stations on 5. And some guy was just like, "Are you insane? Like, what are you doing driving?" I'm like, "Dude, it's a car, man. Like, it runs fine. Like, yeah, the defrost sucks and it doesn't have rear defrost or whatever, but you open the wing windows and hopefully stuff airs itself out."
Yeah, well, look at when you dropped it off and we drove it in the snow.
We drove it in the snow.
Losing it. Yeah,
How
people
many
were
people?
losing it.
We posted a picture at the gas station. Kevin did this crazy awesome burnout. The amount of like hate mail. You drove in the snow and like we can see salt on the side of the car. And
oh my God. Yeah. And it rusted to the ground in the shop too. And I had to put brand new quarters on it just because we drove it once.
One time in the snow, which is not the only, like I've driven that. I don't know how many times I've driven in the snow.
Oh, believe me, that car was oiled down well enough underneath the salt wasn't going to get to anything anyway.
That car was like pre-lubed, right? But everybody freaks out. And like, and I always tell them, like, listen, hey, be careful with your car. You don't take them out and drive them on totally salted roads, but like, it would be winter in New York. And I would be like, I want to drive my cars. And I would just take them out. And you know what? You hit them with a hose. You turn the hose on. You spray them down. And if you get God forbid you get a little surface scaling or whatever, who gives a shit? It's still a car. But people covet these things like they're made of solid gold. They don't get one experience out of the things the entire time. That's why I love Bring a Trailer. I love going to Bring a Trailer and seeing these cars with, Hemi, whatever the case, 200 and I don't know, 13,000 miles. 13,000 miles since new.
Yeah.
What is the point of even owning something like that?
Well, the ones that I don't understand that show up on some of those sites are like the 78 Chevy 3/4 ton camper special pickup with 1,200 original miles. It's like, what's the story with that? I mean, there always has to be some kind of story that's like odd, because it's like, who buys that truck and parks it as a collector's item? That isn't why it was parked. It's like, there's got to be a backstory.
Man, I don't believe any of that crap, because like most of those speedometers, it's a cable. You just go underneath, unscrew it, pop it off. The odometer's disconnected.
No, nobody would ever roll odometer back.
Never. But that cracks me up. And it's like, come on, people. Are you kidding me like that? And if it's truly a 10,000 mile car or a 12,000 mile car, okay, and I'm looking at it and the side bolster on the driver's seat is worn to shit and the brake pedal has a decent amount of wear on it, y'all are just straight up lying. I don't care who you are, all the plastic is cracked and you've got get the hell out of here with that. You know what I mean?
Well, and people get hung up on that low mileage thing. I mean, there's a lot of cars that have 70,000 miles that are really, really nice. I mean, just because somebody took care of it, and are better than some of these 20,000, so-called 20,000 mile cars.
I would much rather buy something with miles, right, than something with, because you at least know it works. And especially if the service history, like, give me a 40-year-old car, 1,000 miles on it and complete service history over, a 30-year-old car with marginal service history, no paperwork. And what I mean, if you have a car that's 50 years old with 10,000 miles and you don't drive that car needs a full restoration.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yep. But everything on that car is garbage from a mechanical standpoint.
Right.
and
I mean, you come across survivors once in a while, but they're few and far between. And I still think, my opinion is a survivor is the best car to buy. I don't really care if it's a 4-door or a 2-door or a Hemi car or whatever, but just the survivors are by far to me the best car.
Well, are they the best car because they've been driven, or just because they haven't been? You don't have to unfuck them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They're just unmolested. I mean, I don't care if and some people get really quirky about, it has the original, belts and hoses. I'm not worried about that, but don't paint it. Like, the best thing you can do for those cars is don't paint it. I mean, think about how many cars that were restored in the 90s, probably. That were beautiful survivor cars, but it was this trend that we had to, be able to eat off the underside of the floor pan as it rolled through Barrett Jackson. And it's like, that's the worst thing that was done to those cars, was that they were restored.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, because that's when we go to SEMA. SEMA is very much like that. Every car you see the paint is phenomenal. You can eat off the undercarriage. And I always tell people, I'm like, you can't see the bottom of the car when you're driving. Nobody's looking at the bottom of the car when you're driving, right?
Yeah.
And so,
well, believe me, we painted the engine compartment on your car, and you can tell we're okay with the paint gun. I mean, we get by, but we are not OE quality paint department here.
But it's a driver. Like
I know.
Everybody.
Well, I told you it's going to get scratched before it shows up in Las Vegas, and I've already scratched it. So it's.
Well, I mean, but that's the whole thing. Like, people always say, like, you gonna paint your car? I go, and like, the car's matte black. Car's hot rod black. Right. No, I'm not going to paint the car. You know why? Because I'm going to take it out and it's going to get stone chipped and rock chipped. So like, when people see this car, the nose looks like it was peppered with a shotgun on that car. Because there is you can't wax it, because it's a matte car. So you can't wax it. You can't clear bra, because if you clear bra, it's going to look like a gloss black car. Right. So the only thing you do is you wipe it down with Prepsol, which is like automotive vinegar to clean off crap. Mm-hmm. And you drive it. And if it gets chipped, you go, right? So at SEMA, the car is going to be chipped up. It's going to have nicks. It's a driver, people. I would rather have a car that is mechanically bomb-proof, that I can run across the desert at 140 miles an hour with the AC on kill, as opposed to having that perfect shiny thing that's on the side of the road because it overheated and nothing works. Yeah. Right? Like, that drives me insane. It just drives me insane. So what do you think the trends are going to be at SEMA? Like, what do you think you're going to see that you don't want to see, or you're just going to like face palm?
I don't know. Honestly, I just haven't been paying attention this year. I don't know what the trends are. It'll be interesting to see what the COVID recovery trend is. It's like, who had parts to build anything is going to be. I mean, that's still a problem, right? I mean, it's still a problem. I mean, like, the AC on your car just isn't done. It's not because we didn't want to. It's just because the parts aren't available. Yeah.
Well, and I think so many builders are going through that exact same thing. I think anybody who's building anything is going through that same thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you start building your SEMA car in the spring of 2021, you're probably fine for this year. But if you started like most people in June of 2022, then you're probably, I mean, unless it's just such a cookie cutter, built from AutoZone type car, but.
Right. Which a lot are. I mean, let's face it, right? Yeah. You're going to see a lot of, and I hate to say this, and I hate to crap on builders, but if you're going to bring a car to SEMA, you got to put some thought into it. There is a lot of stuff out there that you're going to walk by and you'll be like, oh, that's a mess. Right.
Oh, every late model Mustang, Camaro, Challenger almost at the show is just, it's like, what is this, a used car lot? I mean, it's like, what can you really do to those cars?
Right.
Other than just bolt on some aftermarket junk.
Right.
I mean, I'll hate on Challengers for a minute. Great. You built the Challenger and you bolted a Whipple on the thing, which is a great blower, but so it's like, so.
Yeah, I know. I think that's it's hard, because I think when you've been in this hobby for a long time, you have, I think, a couple of categories, right? You have the people that want to break into the hobby and they're budget constrained, and that's totally fine, right? But if you have the imagination and if you have the wherewithal, you can build some pretty cool stuff with a budget, and that,
Yeah, and that's where I think, SEMA ultimately, for whatever reason, has diverged from its core mission, I believe, of serving the automotive aftermarket business, and has kind of gone to the automotive enthusiast,
right.
which I think has completely changed. Because, if I walked by a booth and it had that late model Challenger, and we work with Anderson Composites, and they would have a pretty boring car with a bunch of carbon fiber bits on it. It's like, okay, well, I get it. It's there because it's showcasing a product. Absolutely. But that's not really where a lot of the cars are at SEMA right now. They're just, I don't know. They're very West Coast choppers, right? Bolt together crap.
Yeah. And that stuff, like, God, there are so many. Whenever you see like these TV cars, it drives me insane, right? That's why I absolutely loathe these kind of overproduced build shows where stuff gets done in a week. Nothing ever gets built in a week. Nothing good ever gets built in a week, right?
No.
The amount of corners that are cut to just make things look bright and shiny is ridiculous.
Yes.
But when somebody says, well, we built a car, my first question is, does it work?
Right.
Right? Because if you built a car and when I say, does it work, that means, does it work? Can I get it and drive it from New York to Los Angeles? And is it gonna be fine?
And right? I think there's definitely builders out there that are starting to build more of those cars. But I mean, I had that awakening back when I was working with Hot Rod, and they would talk about the Riddler cars that they would try to photograph, and they wouldn't even stay running for an entire photo shoot.
No.
I mean, and that's a fucking Riddler car, which they've spent, $2 million on or something. Right. And it's like, who's the guy spending $2 million on a car that won't even run? It's like, what I mean, where do you then think to yourself, gee, maybe I should have spent the extra $1,000 and actually got it to run right?
Well, I mean, it all comes down, like when I was doing my Big Muscle in the House of Muscle shows, right? We would be driving privately owned cars. And I would always, first question that I would ask the owners, how many miles did you put on the car last year? Right?
I drove it up to Cars and Coffee twice.
Yeah. No, it'll run all day. Not what I asked. How many miles did you put on? Did you put 100? Did you put 6,000? Like, give me a thing. And man, so many of the cars that we drove were they just didn't work. I mean, I remember we drove a supposedly 1,000 horsepower 32 Ford, and the guy was like, yeah, I just put 3,000 miles on the car. It's fine. I literally drove it once, did a pull, lost complete brakes, right? At speed. And it's like, I'm like, dude, you're killing me here. Like, you literally almost killed me because you lied to me. And, no, I didn't mean 3,000. I meant 300.
Even 300. I mean, if you lose brakes, it's like you didn't drive it up and on the trailer. So,
right. So it's difficult, whereby people that drive their cars, those are the cars that you want to look at. You want to look at these hot rods. You want to look at these muscle cars that are actually driven. So a lot of these SEMA cars, especially like the super high dollar stuff, like it just annoys me because I never see them after SEMA. I never see them run, like, I don't know, do a road trip
and I don't understand. I mean, and I've had this conversation many times with people. It's like, where do these aftermarket companies justify that kind of spend for one show? I don't see it. And I see, if you look at the trend of SEMA shrinking and these shows actually shrinking courtesy of COVID, I think you're seeing that, where these companies are like, we're not getting a return on spending all this money in showing these cars. I mean, GM and Ford are a perfect example of that, right? They're not going to be at SEMA this year. And obviously the ROI is not there. I mean, Ford and GM both have had these massive displays over the years. I mean, Ford was always, I would always go look at the Ford display, even if I wasn't super interested in it, because they just, it was an awesome display, and they did really good cars. But obviously it's not generating any revenue to be there.
No, but what I find interesting is both Ford and both GM will have cars there done by builders.
Oh, right?
Yeah. They will have cars there, and they will be there. Like, I think the newest term for SEMA is, are you showing that? No, but I'll be there on foot. Right. So what they're doing is they're kind of saving that money, that 10, 12, 50, 60,000 or up that they would spend on a SEMA booth and everything that goes along with it. And they want to walk around and they want to see the products that are there and see who's doing what. And it's not a bad move. I mean, you can't have everybody do it at once because then the show wouldn't exist. But I think you have a large number of aftermarket companies that are like, you know what, I'm going to take a step back. And that, like you said, COVID's responsible for that. But I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that people are doing that, because the other part is when these companies do you go on foot, you actually have a chance to talk to them. As opposed to them, and they could see what's going on at other people's booths, as opposed to just being sequestered to one spot for the entire show.
Well, and it's difficult even in a week when you're out there actually to see everything. I mean, I go and I've been, I don't know, the last 8-10 years, something like that. And even in 4 days, basically, I mean, there's still half the show I miss. I remember I went the first couple of years and I didn't even know there was an off-road section above the tires. and if you actually are there having conversations and talking to people and not just picking up 9 bajillion brochures, you can't see the whole thing. Because if you're legitimately there doing business, you can't see the whole thing because you don't have enough time.
Right. Yeah, and SEMA is huge. I mean, now we have, what is it, the West Hall, the big massive hall. That's another piece of it. There's a lot going on at this show. And, you know, to Kevin's point, a few years ago, if you would have went pre-COVID, you could spend 4 or 5 days there, walk around the entire show and not see everything. Right. And, you know, it's great when people whip out their step counters and they're like, I walked 48,000 steps today. And you're just like,
I'll come back and somebody will say, did you see such and such, or did you see this or that? And I'm like, no. Yeah. Well, how did you not see that? You're right. I'm sorry I didn't see the new Gen 3 Hemi connecting rod at somebody's booth. Yeah. I mean, there's things like that. It's just like, I get it. There's some cool stuff, but I wouldn't. I mean, unless that's my core business, I'm not gonna see it.
So, I mean, does SEMA? Do you ever get ideas? Have you ever came away from SEMA and been like, you know what, that was cool. Like I've seen something and I like the concept. I don't like the execution, and like take it, you know, like, do you use other things that you see, or how do you view that?
I don't know. Where do you get inspiration from? Sure. I see a lot of things I know I would never do. I mean, that's probably what I learned more of what not to do than what I should do. Right. But I'm not a custom car builder, right? I mean, I'm a practical car builder, I guess, if that's a term, where fabrication is not something I want to do, or, you know, something that we strive to be good at. Right. You know, are there some bits that are fabricated onto your car? Sure. Yeah. And I'm sure somebody's going to walk up to your car and be like, who the fuck fabricated that thing? And I'm going to be like, whatever. I mean, I don't care. But I mean, so yeah, I mean, it is what it is.
Well, you know, it's interesting because everybody who's heard about the Daytona or seen pictures of it and stuff like that, when we first started having this conversation, this car was never meant to be this crazy over-the-top build. It was made to work. It was made, the whole conversation was get in, drive across the country at speed, take it on a racetrack if you want to, have fun with it. You know what's going to happen? Nothing. It's just going to work. And I think so many people lose focus of actually having a drivable vehicle that they can jump in at any time and use, and they get blinded by all these, you know, these bells and whistles that they just don't need, and parts that are simply not tested the way they should be. And I think that's a large reason that you don't see a lot of these vehicles after SEMA. And listen, these cars that are at SEMA, people have tons of money tied into it. And hundreds of thousands of dollars are in these vehicles. Where is the ROI on that? Yeah. Like how are these companies recouping that ROI?
Oh, well, I love the cars that come up for sale, you know, like what, 6 months after SEMA, not even 6 months after SEMA. Oh, SEMA build. It's like your bolt together cookie cutter, you know, wheels and tire with a lowering kit car does not demand an extra 20 grand. It's like, no.
Well, I'll tell you that. And like, you see some of the really super high profile builds from some of these guys out there. and they do masterful work visually.
Mhm.
My question is, all right, you got $1 million in this car. That's what it costs to build. You wait 4.5, 5 years. That car is going for maybe a quarter of the price at one of the big
Yeah.
auction houses,
Yeah.
right? $1 million just so we saw one, it was a Pantera. I forget who it was built by, but like that was $1 million car. That sold for like 2.25 at Barrett.
Right.
And I was like, well, somebody's crying right now.
Yeah, I mean, my problem with some of these cars, and it's my problem, right? I mean, it's my personal issue is no matter what I see, I honestly, unless it's been built by an OEM, there isn't anything that's ever perfect. There's always something that you can find.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure there's probably something out there that I haven't seen yet, you know, maybe great, but and some of the stuff is so simple. It's so minor. Like, when did people forget about blackout treatments behind the grill when they frickin' paint their cars? It's like, you know, if your car's orange and I can see orange through the grill, there's a problem.
Yeah, well, like I said, I don't know if they just don't care that much, or if they're in such a rush to get these vehicles done that they don't have the time to put that extra bit of effort. But I always feel like SEMA cars, for the most part, are 70%ers, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably true. I mean, I think there's some there that are good. I mean, I can't remember all of them that I've, you know, there's definitely some that show up and it's like, yeah, they're put together and you know, and somebody spent some time, and yeah, they're a nice car. I'm not into the bling, right? So when everybody has, you know, billet hood hinges and crap like that, it's like, I don't care. Does the hood go up? You know,
well,
put a prop rod on it. I don't care.
Well, that's always been my thing. Like like I hate bolt-on shit that doesn't work, right? Like any visual stuff that doesn't have a purpose, I'm like, just get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had this,
and I had a moment on your car where I'm like, man, it'd be nice not to have that giant spring on that hood hinge, but I stopped myself. I'm like, I'm not doing it. I'm not putting on a different hinge.
Well, that's, you know, but that's a factory hinge and it still works. That's the whole thing, right? Like I always looked at the Daytona and, you know, listen, everybody knows the Daytona is a ridiculous looking car. It's a giant cartoon character, and it is probably one of the weirdest OEM cars ever made and sold to the general public, right? I always looked at that car and I'm like, man, that car would look so much better without that wing. You know? Like if you took that wing off and put like a little ducktail on the back, it would look like a missile, right? As opposed to a rocket. And it's just, but when you listen, you go back and you hear the backstory, like it was literally designed by a dude at Chrysler's missile division. You go, oh, well, that makes sense, right? Kind of falls into place. It makes sense. But like I know of 4 other Daytonas that are being built right now, super high dollar stuff, all with red eye, Hellcat, Elephants, and blah blah blah. I don't know. I might just be pissed because I never see them being used. Yeah. You know, I think, you know, like if some of these builders just went out and used these cars and really used them and like documented it, that to me would be the coolest thing in the world.
Well, what I find is how much stuff people rip out of their cars for no reason. Like your car's getting a Hell Crate harness. Mm-hmm. That little PDM power distribution module does so much in that Hell Crate harness, yet people will reinvent that 10 times over. And then they like gut all the rest of the wiring out of the car. Yet you can go to the year 1 catalog, just like you did, and buy a brand new, you know, headlight harness and taillight harness and blah, 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 you know, and plug the damn things in and, you know, and just tie it into the Hell Crate PDM and like, you're done. I mean, it's like, you're done. I mean, there's nothing special, just tie them together and don't reinvent the simple stuff.
Do you think the majority of the people know that? Meaning, or do you think they have to reinvent it?
Well, I think a lot of people think they have to reinvent it because that's what they see on TV. You know, I mean, more power to the paid advertising, right? Where I get my product placement, but so much of those shows are rip and tear, and plug this harness back in that has all this stuff in it. It's like, yeah, I don't know. Some dude in the 60s already did that for me. What do I need to change it for?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's the other component, right? Is especially on the older cars.
Older cars. Let's preface it with we're telling that somebody at Chrysler designed it and not Ford and GM, because it's the 60s Ford and GM, that stuff is just junk. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, I keep circling. I have to quantify that quite often, because people are like, oh, my 64 Chevy. It's like, that suspension on that car you should tear off because it is horrible. So yes, you should remove that immediately.
Yeah, but Kevin, everybody always says that the Mopar stuff was junk and that the Chevy and the Ford stuff, because again, everybody has this, like, I don't know, this thing against torsion bars. Everybody like torsion bars. This is the worst thing ever designed, and it's like,
yeah, it's a spring. And go look at a Porsche sometime, or a Honda Civic. You know.
But I never understood that. I never understood why people just would, especially the Ford and Chevy guys, would trash everything that the Mopar guys did. And I'm not saying they're perfect by any means.
No.
But it worked. It all worked.
Right. You know? But there's some sketchy stuff made by some manufacturers in the 60s and 70s that was just like, yeah, I probably would tear that out. So you're right.
Well, so what are you looking forward to, anything, or what do you think your takeaway is going to be at SEMA?
I want a nap. That's what my takeaway is going to be.
Well, that's good. Okay, because we got 3 cars, right? You're bringing the Daytona, and you're bringing the wide body Pikes Peak Charger,
right? Yep.
Right. We've got the Durango that's going, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's pretty cool. We got 3 cars in the Dodge booth, which is pretty badass.
Yeah.
You know. And I think we've got all different flavors of different. We got an SUV, we got a true race car, we got the Daytona.
All three blower cars, though. All 3 blower 8-speeds.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I didn't even think about that. You are correct.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, let me ask you this: with the wide body, with the Charger, what do you have planned for 2023 with that car?
I got that email today, and it's just this moving target. So, but I bought. I'm finishing buying actually at SEMA. So there's my guy that usually goes and picks cars up. He's going to go pick up a car for me. And it's getting added to my plan for 2023. So we'll see if it shows up or not.
Okay. Will it be at SEMA?
It'll be in my trailer at SEMA. But actually, the funny thing is, it has been at SEMA before. How's that?
Okay, that's fair. Fair. I'm not going to jinx anything by going too far into this, but that's fair.
No, it's actually it's just an old race car that popped up for sale, and I don't know, I like collecting. It's interesting. I try to grab late model Challenger race cars as they come up, if they're, and they're few and far between, right? Other than drag cars, so I'm not worried about that. So actually, I bought one of Sam Hubinet's old drift cars.
Wow. Okay. So what is that powered by? That's because that's not a blower car.
No, that's a old LA based A8 aluminum block with W9s and fuel injection.
So is that basically like a NASCAR motor style type of thing?
Yeah, it's actually a sprint car motor. So it's 430 cubic inches or something, aluminum block, and it's based on the sprint car stuff from the 90s and the 2000s.
And so what does something like that spin to?
8,500.
Jesus.
They sound great, but I'll pull that out, and I'll just put a red eye in it.
So then what's the plan for that motor? Is that going to
I don't know. It'll probably get, but either I'll sell it or it'll get pushed over into the pile. So I don't know.
Yeah, well, you've got the old Daytona motor in the pile.
Yeah, I got a lot of stuff. Actually, I was picking parts off my collection for your car, so I have to keep track of all the parts I need to scrounge back.
Replace and put back on the other cars. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, we pulled some parts off the Trans Am or the A sedan car. I pulled a couple bits off that, and I pulled a couple bits off another motor I had stashed. Just, it's just the way it goes.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that, and you have a very understanding wife and family too, which is.
Yeah. It's been busy. I mean, would I have loved to, had it done sooner? Sure. But, it's just the way it is. I mean, I'd love to say that I'm a full-time car builder, and that's obviously not true. So that's probably why it doesn't get done on time either. So.
Well, I just think the cool part is that we know, and I think everybody out there knows that, like, once the car is fully done and track tested and everything else, we're gonna drive the shit out of this car. Like, everybody's gonna see this. In fact, Kevin texted me today. He's like, "We gotta drive this car back from Michigan to California," and I was like, "Absolutely!" Like, the cars,
Right.
And that's I think should be the point of anybody that goes down this road to build anything or has an inclination to build anything. You have to make that real decision if you're gonna drive it, because if you're gonna drive it, there are certain things you have to do to ensure that it is a fully reliable vehicle that you can put under any conditions. And by that, I mean, will it sit in traffic and not overheat? Can you drive it in foul weather? Are there leaks in it? Does it do this? Does it, like, there are so many different things that I think people just don't think about when they're building a car, as opposed to, I need the best paint job.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I'm definitely not one that spends money on paint.
Not at all.
I mean, and I'll be honest, I can't believe how expensive it is.
Oh,
I mean, just the material to paint, the engine compartment on your car was like $700. I mean, it's like ridiculous.
Yeah, well, people, it's really interesting when you tell people, they're like, "Well, do you know of a good painter?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah." And they're like, "Well, how much do you think it would be to get my car painted?" I'm like, "A good paint job?" I'm like, "Starting 28 to 35 grand." And they go, "Excuse me?"
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably what it's going to cost. Especially, that's what kills me about, you see all these people buying project cars where the body has all this.
Forget it. Buy a new car.
I'm like, you are 60,000 into body work and paint, and you haven't even got it rolling yet.
No.
That's the thing that I'm just like, no. Right?
Yeah.
If you can buy a project where the body and paint is completely done, you are so far ahead of the game. The only issue that you have sometimes is, like, you don't know what's under that paint. So
yeah, but that goes back to buying, like you have that engine and trans laying around. It's like, buy a 69 Coronet 500 318 grandma special that is basically perfect, and turn it into a good car. Yeah, you're right. It's not a numbers matching, whatever, but who cares? You're going to have more fun with it. I mean, I always say that. I mean, I have a V code 6-pack 70 Super B, and I don't ever drive it because, number one, every time I drive it, I break it. Number two, every time I drive it, I think somebody's going to steal it. And it's like, I just don't want to do it. It's like, it's not even fun.
Right. Yeah. No, if you can't enjoy them and you can't drive them, and you're so worried about paint, you're so worried about this and that, there's no joy, at least for me anyway. There's no joy. There's no joy in saying I own something and I drove it 50 miles last year.
Yeah.
Then you just got a really expensive paperweight.
Right.
That's the only thing. So, well, I'm looking forward to SEMA. I think we'll probably end up doing a follow-up show because I don't know if this is going to air during SEMA week or right after, but either way, I'm sure we're both going to have takeaways about what's going to happen there.
Yeah. We'll learn something, and we'll find out how it went, I guess. So
yeah,
I mean, it's going to be what it is, and whatever's done when we get there, it will at least look the part, but you might not be able to hit the switch. So
yeah, that's all right. But it
is what it is.
Yeah, it's fine. And if people have questions, come by, ask us, talk to us, email us, doesn't matter. We'll always get back to you.
Right. Now it'll be running and driving soon enough.
Cool. All right, man. Well, Kevin, as usual, thank you for coming on to the podcast. It's always a pleasure. Yeah, man, I'll see you next week, and then we'll have a follow-up show, and we'll go over the atrocities of some of the big.
Yeah, well, you should take a few photos, and we can just scroll through them. So
I'm taking a bunch of photos. So we'll go through those, and we'll also go through the best of the best. How's that? We'll pick our favorites because we will have some that are really great.
Yeah. Well, if I pay attention, so we'll have some.
All right, cool. All right, buddy.
All right,
Always
talk to you
pleasure,
later.
man. And I will talk to you next time on the Hot Rod Barbecue.
See ya.
Thanks for listening, folks. And again, please subscribe to the Hot Rod Barbecue podcast. If you're on Spotify, check us out there. Subscribe to it on iTunes. And if you are going to go to YouTube, make sure you go to the Hot Rod Barbecue podcast and hit that subscribe button. And we'll come to you every week.